Welcome to the Amashs Files, your one-stop podcast for Justin Amash's march to the presidency, featuring deep dives into who Justin Amash is, campaign analysis from experts, and news from the campaign trail. If you're ready, let's get started. Hey folks, this is Eric. I'm along here with Tyler.
Hello everyone.
And we're joined by Matt Welch. Matt Welch is the editor-at-large of Reason, the Libertarian magazine of free minds and free markets. He served as Reason's editor-in-chief from 2008 through 16. He's co-author, along with Nick Gillespie, of the 2011 book, The Declaration of Independence, How Libertarian Politics Can Fix What's Wrong with America, which Tyler Cohen called the up-to-date statement of libertarianism. Matt can be found all over the media as he hosts the Reason Roundtable podcast, The Fifth Column, and is a regular guest on cable news programs. He's truly a giant in the libertarian media world. Matt, thanks so much for joining us on the Amashs Files.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the over-generous introduction. That was very nice.
Well, I was careful not to call you a Titan, so I'd like to welcome you to the show, and obviously this week, Justin Amash announced that he's running for president. Big news in the libertarian world, and I'm sure within the Reason universe as well. What's been your general impression of sort of the announcement?
That it came pretty late. I mean, he didn't have to announce. This is what I have been writing since speculation first started to intensify about his designs on the office, which began like in January of 2019, and that Libertarian Party uniquely, and this is hard for capital L libertarians to understand, but they have a different process than the other two bigger parties do about choosing a nominee. That primaries and caucuses are theoretical. They don't matter. They're non-binding. They're ways for people to make names for themselves to generate some kind of momentum or news. But there's no business done in a primary or caucus that needs to last. All the decision happens at the national convention, where 1,000 people, that's it, get to decide who gets to be on, presumably, although now with coronavirus it's going to be hard, 50 ballots. So it's a really weird kind of a situation. You have this prize that they've worked really hard, gathering signatures in the rain and all that for years and years to get to this point, and yet it's decided in person at the last minute. So he could have announced on May 20th, but at the same time, you kind of want to have at least some ramp up here, because the Libertarian Party world now, they've announced, or they've nominated in the three previous cycles, former Republican elected officials. And there's a little bit of weariness about that as an approach, and a feeling of, hey, we're the sloppy thirds here. Once you've decided that this doesn't work and that doesn't work, you come to us, and it kind of hurts people's sense of kind of self-worth and self-confidence. So all that is a way of saying it came pretty late. I've been watching this really close for a long, long time. And let's just say that I wasn't expecting to find this out on Twitter on 8 p.m. of a Tuesday, 3 weeks before the convention. So late breaking.
Yeah. You and Nick wrote the book, as mentioned in the intro, The Declaration of Independence. Justin declared his own Declaration of Independence, which sounded eerily similar to your book in some ways, back in July 4th last year. How do you think that has sort of crafted sort of his image in the Libertarian Party, but also just in D.C. and I guess just in the broader media?
There is a intriguing kind of overlap with his pitch to what we were describing back in 2011, which is, and I'm, this is overly summarizing both of it, but is that, hey, look, the 42% of America thereabouts describes themselves when asked to self-identify as either Democrat or Republican, not what they actually belong to, but how they conceive of themselves politically. 42% conceive themselves as neither, as independents. And so those people, we argued back then, are being increasingly poorly served by the kind of rump shrinking political parties who depend on kind of negative polarization and hating the other tribe. And so in doing so, they get the passionate true believer vote for sure, but then it sort of alienates others. Okay, it's an interesting theory. There's a pushback theory to thesis back then, which is that, oh yeah, but independents actually vote in predictable ways, and there's some validity to that. Here's what has changed since then: the amount of the ferocity of the tone of the negative polarization has increased in ways that were kind of hard to imagine. You had one of the two major parties actually taken over by an outsider and had their ideology changed, and the tonality of it, the negative tonality of it, which is a note that Amashs hits constantly already on the presidential campaign trail, is central to it. That matters more than actually anything else does. So he's ramped that up, and Republicans have gone with him. Even people who used to subscribe or describe as comparatively serious people are now like competing in a Donald Trump mimicry contest. It's pretty disgusting to watch. The Democratic Party, meanwhile, almost barely survived 2 attempted takeovers by an independent socialist, and clearly a lot of the energy inside the party is on that element of it, and yet can sort of like stagger to the finish line with these ancient centrists for the party type of establishment figures that are unloved and have big enthusiasm gaps. So 2018 was a real tough test for Nick Gillespie and my theory, the midterm election, because what happens when people are negatively polarized? More people voted in the midterms in 2018 as a percentage than any midterm election in 100 years. People are fired up. It was after a very close, very bitterly divided presidential election. People really want to either get Trump out or to keep Trump in. And they're very passionate about it. And third parties and independents got creamed. They got slaughtered in 2018. Gary Johnson, who had gotten 9% of the vote as a presidential candidate in New Mexico in 2016, ran for senator in his home state where he's well known, and it's a small state. He'd been governor twice there, ran for senator against an absolutely no-name Republican, Mick Rich. Sounds like a drummer from some like 70s prog rock band. He had never been in elected office before, was terrible as a candidate, just some rando basically off the street, and whoever the incumbent Democratic senator there is, Martin Heinrich's next. So like it was and he got Rand Paul's endorsement, which is actually a surprise. And he was talking about a lot of the same things that Justin Amash will talk about, is the debt deficits are going to cream people, all this kind of stuff. Got 15% of the vote, right? That's it. And in the most favorable circumstances you could possibly imagine. And then across the board, everywhere else in the country, people got creamed. And look about what's happened since then. Everybody who's come in to any race that has been making Amash-like noises. Mark Sanford got drummed out of the Republican Party and kicked on his way out by President Trump, which is part of the hastening of Amash's own exit from the party. Bill Weld tried to run as a Republican. How'd that go? Mark Sanford again tried to run for president as a Republican. That all these people are like bugs in the windshield. Jeff Flake, right? He was making some Amash-like noises, albeit with a more dour kind of countenance, and he became the most hated man in politics. So it's a really tough sell right now to do this. So long way of saying that I appreciate and I understand and I'm fluent in his pitch of like there's this vast universe out there that is being absolutely underserved, and at some point it is going to be attractable by someone who is sane and is competent and respects the differences of people in truly politically and otherwise. And it's a great test to see whether in seriously unfavorable conditions you can kind of like turn that into, wow, that's impossible, to wow, that's inevitable. Right. So that's I think the great question of this race.
Matt, you sort of touched on this briefly, but I wanted to go back a little bit. You've always been following libertarianism in American politics for a very long time. When Justin Amash was first elected to Congress in 2010 compared to 2020, the entire movement, not just the Republican Democrats, but the entire libertarian movement, representation in either party, has completely changed on the face of it. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on why that happened. Was it all Trump? Were there other factors that played into that? 2010 to now.
Tim Alberta, I think, wrote the best book on that, whose name I'm blanking on now, but like he's done great work.
American Carnage is the book.
Thank you. And he also did a very nice Q&A with Amash this week, with a pretty good long intro of it. My thumbnail take on what happened is power happened. And it happened, it did predate Trump. If you look at what was American politics about between 2009 and 2000, let's say the end of 2013, beginning of 2014, it was overwhelmingly about holding the line on spending and fighting over Obamacare.
Yep.
Right. All those Tea Party rallies were basically about that. I went to a whole bunch. I actually went there expecting to see a lot of evidence of racism, right? Because I was like, okay, these people are all anti-Obama. Let's see some bones through noses and stuff like that. And you did see a tiny bit of that, but I was very impressed, probably overly so in retrospect. But I was very impressed by the message discipline and also by some of the things that the people I met there were talking about. And among what they said was like, hey, look, we made a mistake in not giving George W. Bush a hard time because he was a big government Republican who did these terrible things. And we should have hit harder, and we'll never do that again. So brought a new wave into Congress, legitimately interesting people. They ran against their party's establishments time and time again, including Rand Paul and Mike Lee, and even Marco Rubio was against the party's establishment at the time. And they brought this fresh new energy. All the most interesting people, I think, in Congress, for the most part, came in 2010 against the establishment party. So what happened is that they were great when they were outnumbered. Those people, when they did not have power, they were useful. I mean, we used to have fights every time the debt ceiling needed to get renewed, and that was actually popular. People like try to pretend that wasn't something that the American public agreed with. They did. They're like, hey, look, yes, extend the debt ceiling, raise it, but let's put some spending caps in as a result. And so that dominated politics for a really long time. The biggest single thing, the two biggest things that I think hampered that, and one of these is a controversial statement among even my colleagues at Reason, two biggest things were Ted Cruz shutting down the government in the fall of 2013 for 17 days in a really pointless exercise over Obamacare, as if there was something he was going to get at the end of that. Like, oh yeah, we're going to forget Obamacare happened, and now we can reopen the government. No, it was just an act of petulance. So when that group of people decided, and Mike Lee was part of this, and I dinged him in public and in private on this, they Republicans and Democrats, Congress and House of Representatives and the Senate could have in 2013 agreed on a spending bill. It was, I think the difference was like between 3.4 and 3.6 trillion dollars, and they just refused to even appoint managers to do the normal negotiations between the houses, and that's what led to this petulant thing. When they went for that kind of nose holding or breath holding politics over actually let's do the government thing, that was a bad sign. And then in November 2014. So what happened as a direct result of that 2013 showdown, which was very unpopular and deservedly so, now that croaked the appetite that Republicans had for that kind of brinksmanship politics, even the popular kind. And so what did Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell say as soon as the government reopened in 2013? It's like, that's the last time we're doing that. And then as soon as Republicans retook control over the Senate, Mitch McConnell wasted about 10 seconds and said, all right, we're never shutting down the government again. Debt ceilings, we're just going to wave them out of existence, and we're off and running. And all the sequestration caps that had come in, all that stuff that began to be systematically removed. And as a political question, it was off the table. So we went from talking about spending every damn day for about 3 years there to never talking about it ever again. And suddenly Rand Paul's running for president, and he doesn't have any issues that anyone is talking about. What they want to talk about is whatever crazy fool thing Donald Trump said yesterday about Mexicans or something. And that dominated discourse. So power corrupted, and then now Trump gets that power, and and everything corrupts. And so and it exposed how many people out there were just reaching for whatever kind of ideological stick they found useful at the moment, and how many of them actually believed it. And it turns out not many of them actually believed it, and that the incentives about holding power just remain true. People want to keep their jobs, and they act in the way that makes that happen. It's a sobering exercise for those of us who kind of actually do care about those ideas. But you know what? My political preferences are almost never expressed by people who are holding political office, so that remains remains true.
No, I mean, I was completely optimistic when all that stuff was going on. I was sort of coming of political age and finding my own libertarian values. And then to see in the past, as you say, 6 or perhaps 4 years, how few people actually care at all about it. I mean, outside of Justin Amash, do you think there's anyone in Congress who actually profess those values and mean them today?
I mean, Mike Lee means them. Rand Paul, in his way, means them. Adapts them to the circumstances and does what he needs to do to stay on the good graces of Donald Trump. Thomas Massey means them. Andy Biggs, who is, I wouldn't describe as anybody's libertarian. I think he's principled about his ideology in Arizona. But that's really it. There's a running joke. There's a couple of people who I won't name, but who hold fundraisers for people in this universe in Washington, D.C. reliably. And they used to hold it for Jeff Flake. He's no longer there. They used to, and it's two different, and they probably don't even hate each other. I don't know what their relationship is with one another. But whenever I go to a fundraiser, and again, it's just as a journalist, just to observe people in Washington, D.C., it's one of these two houses that I'm always at. And they used to hold fundraisers for 15 people, and then those for 10 people, and now it's like 5, maybe 3, maybe 2. Both of them are houses are like, you know what, we don't have anybody left.
You've been involved in the Libertarian Party, not involved in the party, but you've certainly been in the Libertarian Party universe for the last year, following the presidential campaign of the candidates who were running before Justin announced. What has been your impression of the candidate quality? Who's out there? What's been going on in the debates? What have they been talking about? And how does Justin's entry into this race change it for them and maybe the discussion within the party?
So I've been covering the party pretty regularly since the spring of 2016. It actually coincided and was part of the reason for me stepping down as editor-in-chief of the magazine when Gary Johnson announced in 2016, and when all of the attempts on the Republican Party to stop Donald Trump failed. I think the last hope was flickered out in Indiana in like April of 2016 when Ted Cruz lost the primary there. Suddenly there's a surge of interest at Reason and Google and everywhere else, like, oh my God, who is the Libertarian running? There's gotta be something else going on. And we were sort of flat-footed. I'm like, screw it. Why don't we just send Matt? I'll stop editing and go on the road with Gary Johnson, write about this stuff. So I've been following fairly closely since then. The Libertarian Party presidential contest prior to Amash running has been, I think, fairly characterizable as a battle over who's going to represent the libertarian wing of the Libertarian Party. By which I mean there's a lot of palpable sense of irritation at the party's decisions in the past, specifically to nominate Bill Weld as vice presidential nominee. He's always been a polarizing figure within the LP, and was before he got nominated by just a whisker in 2016. And then his behavior in the last week before the 2016 presidential election, when he went on Rachel Maddow to vouch for the character of Hillary Clinton. Strangely or interestingly, Weld after that dived back in the LP and spent a year and change being their lead fundraiser and going to all the state conventions and debating with Adam Kokesh and all this kind of stuff. And I presumed as recently as January 2019 that he was going to be running for the nomination. Turns out then he turned on a dime and went back to the Republican Party to become a bug on Donald Trump's windshield. So that went away. So the party is there's a series of people who are running for that. Jacob Hornberger, who's the leading candidate up until Amash has jumped in, and he certainly has done the most in terms of he's been winning the bulk of the primaries, or even the primaries which none of the above, or nobody wins. He's in second place. He's 70 years old, a long-time libertarian world educator and thinker, founder of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and just anti-war, anti-Fed stalwart, kind of in the Ron Paul universe. Has been getting the enthusiastic support of what is known as the Mises caucus inside the Libertarian Party, which is a growing caucus of people who affiliate positively with the Ludwig von Mises Institute in Auburn, Alabama. And so he's been a interesting and effective communicator since November. Other leading candidates include the political satirist Vermin Supreme, who wears a big boot on his head and talks about free ponies for everybody and mandatory toothbrushing for all. And he's been a serial kind of joke candidate for Democratic and Republican primaries, usually in New Hampshire. He's actually kind of libertarian, and at debates, and I've moderated a few of these, he'll take the boot off his hat, and he's still funny, and he's still weird, but will defend from a sincere point of view a lot of libertarian ideas, and he's making some kind of larger points that are of interest to people. So he's been kind of successful. Adam Kokesh is a kind of voluntarist decentralizer who wants to. He's a longtime libertarian activist. He's been arrested like 5,000 times. Former Marine, and his name is Kokesh, and he lives on a compound in Arizona. I like Adam a lot on a personal level, and so he's running on a policy of the first day of office. He's going to sign an executive order to effectively shut down the federal government for good. In an orderly process. So he's got a pretty radical point of view. Jo Jorgensen is a 1996 Libertarian Party vice presidential candidate. She is an academic from either South or North Carolina. Don't ask me to ever get those straight. I believe North. And yeah, I think it's from there. She cleans up well and seems like a normal person in the context of everyone there. And please don't take that for me being anti-abnormal. That's just a sort of where she fits in the firmament. And then about 2 weeks ago, Judge Jim Gray, who is he's kind of a Gary Johnson figure in that he came out against the war on drugs in the 1990s when nobody was doing that. And he did this as a sitting judge in Orange County, California, which back then was conservative. Back then he was a Republican. He ran as the vice presidential candidate in 2012 with Gary Johnson. He wanted to do it again in 2016, but once Bill Weld showed up, he thought, oh, that's a better idea. He had been previously backing Lincoln Chafee, who is sort of a been in every party kind of character, but also very strongly anti-war, Northeastern, moderate Republican, Rockefeller Republican type guy. Chafee didn't really gain any traction, in part because of the backlash against Weld and kind of recent converts to the party. And so when he backed out, Jim Gray wanted to come in to appeal towards libertarian voters who have kind of a pragmatic approach towards who they should nominate and are scared of the more kind of hardcore elements out there. So that's, I think, the leading bits of the field. Hornberger, his basic pitch is that this is the campaign of principle for the party of principle. And that has been an effective pitch so far. He has, on his website, done at least a 5-part series last time I looked, called Justin Amash, LP Interloper. But after the congressman announced, Brian Doherty got a hold of him, and he was like, "Yeah, it's great. He's running. It's going to put more media attention on our race, and welcome him to the party." So that's the thumbnail of the field.
Do you see Justin has the ability to unite those, we'll call the pragmatists and the Mises sort of parts of the party? Do you think he can bridge them successfully and have them unite behind him? Whereas I see a lot of those candidates are sort of one or the other.
My current prediction, and I don't know, I'm just pulling this out of my hair, but is that, and we should say that, like, the big unknown right now is what the hell is going to happen to the convention? Right? They're supposed to make that decision today. At a LNC meeting, because it's supposed to happen May 21st to May 25th in Austin, Texas. The hotel canceled it 6 days ago, so that's a problem. There's this thing called coronavirus, so they have to figure out, we're going to do a Zoom meeting. How does that work, right? Because you're doing ballots. The way they do it is everyone who's running and crosses some threshold gets on the ballot, and then you vote, and they keep voting until you get 50% plus one. Right. Okay. So, like, how How do you make sure that everyone's there? All the delegates are on Zoom or on whatever it's going to be, or modified thing. And then each round of voting, you lop off the low man or woman, and then you vote again until it's out there. So my current prediction is that it'll be like a baseball Hall of Fame vote in that there's a lot of people who don't want it to be unanimous. So I think there's enough sentiment within the party of like, damn it, these Republican interlopers and also, legitimate, even among people who have liked and wanted Amash to run for president for a really long time, there's some resentment that he came in so late. Although I should say that some of that resentment can be dulled real quick now that he's an actual sitting member of Congress waving the Libertarian flag, which is a pretty important milestone for the party. So that might have already eroded. But my prediction is that they'll torture him for a round before he will likely get it, because there hadn't really, Judge Jim Gray was trying to get that pragmatist kind of block, but so was Lincoln Chafee before, and nobody was catching fire. Part of what the pragmatist oriented people who are themselves personally as radical as you can imagine, but it's just more in terms of strategy, but part of their reluctance is just that no one was super catching fire, no one was really well known outside, no one has made him or herself an effective speaker for libertarian ideas on the normal planet. Well, Justin Amash has a better track record of that than I think the other people. He's just able to make more news than Jacob Hornberger, no matter how much Jacob Hornberger has been tilling the fields all those many decades.
Case in point, I mean, Justin's announcement on Tuesday generated a wave of media attention, popular attention that Hornberger never got in close to. No one was coming out and saying Hornberger's stealing votes from Biden. But when Justin declared that,
I mean, and I feel for those, like I'm sure Jacob feels that's fundamentally unfair, and it kind of is. And like, what do you do about it? It's difficult. I can say that we notice the traffic to the articles that we write, and when and people had been paying attention to the libertarian race when I wrote about it before coronavirus. When I wrote about it or referenced it, or even wrote about and referenced, the little rump ex-libertarians trying to run against Trump after the virus, boy, you could just hear a pin drop. Nobody cares. Like, it's just not, I'd write about the Libertarian Convention might be up in the air. It's in limbo. Nobody cares. And they'll care a little bit more now because Justin Amash is part. So Justin coming in, there is just a level of national attention. And he has an ability, he's going to go on CNN, Jake Tapper this Sunday. He has entree into a media world, which none of the existing candidates do. And it's just a reality. It also, I think, reflects that, he won some elections. That's pretty significant. He's won six of them. He's held office. He's taken unpopular stances. He has learned how to talk in front of hostile audiences in ways that most human beings don't have the opportunity to. So some of this media advantage is earned media advantage too. So it's hard to sort out. When in doubt, definitely blame Reason Magazine at all times. But Amash can attract a level of national excitement that the rest of the field combined cannot.
One of the concerns about people in the Libertarian Party, as you mentioned earlier, is that you're just getting the failed Republican, someone who just, for whatever reason, they don't get along with their party, and so they hop in for vanity reasons or maybe legitimate reasons they want to be president, or for good reasons. And so you have Bob Barr in 2008, you have Gary Johnson in 2012, and then 2016. Do you see Justin as being significantly different candidate? I mean, I think probably the contrast between Bob Barr is pretty obvious, but when it comes to Gary Johnson, sort of the weight, Gary Johnson was an elected sitting governor for 2 terms in New Mexico. So in some ways, he's as electorally as successful as Justin has been, and maybe even more so because he won an executive level. How do you see him different than Gary Johnson, and what does he bring something different and more to the party than Gary?
Justin is definitely a much more hardcore libertarian than Gary Johnson is. He's more fluent in starting from principle and then working outwards towards the reality of governance. Gary Johnson is kind of fundamentally pragmatic in his approach. Like you would see him in 2016. I think some of the mistakes that he made on the campaign trail, particularly his first big, and him and Bill Weld's first big um, town hall event on CNN. I forget when it was, maybe in June or May, June probably. He was asked a question about drugs, and keep in mind, Gary Johnson, again, was the first sitting politician in the country to say, "Hey, drug war's stupid. We should maybe legalize marijuana." And that was crazy. Like Democrats wouldn't say that back in the 1990s, but here's a Republican saying that. So he's been absolutely brave on it. And so when asked by someone about like the opioid crisis or heroin or something like that, he would just waffle like crazy and hem and haw, and he'd eventually get to the answer. The meat of the answer was usually like, prohibition's not a good idea and we should do something else. But like, he doesn't start from the more kind of strong philosophical position that, for instance, John McAfee, who had been running against him in 2016, would say when they were competing for the nomination, of just like, you own your body. Don't have the government tell you what goes in your body. It's kind of a quicker answer. So he was like that. He was always kind of calibrating. They had this statement, which after the election, Weld interestingly kind of repudiated, but they say there's a 6-lane highway down the middle of the road, right, between the poles of the two parties. And so we can attract all these people by a kind of centrist approach. Well, let's be honest, that worked in historical levels of success, right? It's fascinating to see, and I always ask people, was the 2016 presidential election from the Libertarian Party standpoint like the greatest ever or the worst ever? And the answer is both. Like it just, that they fundamentally tripled any previous result, and which is great. But there's also the sense of, my God, they blew a historic opportunity. It's hard to figure that out. But like, I think that there is a desire felt not just among party regulars, but just people in general, that there's something more galvanizing about appeals to principle sometimes, or potentially galvanizing, right? Like the Ron Paul revolution and the Bernie Sanders kind of revolution have some weird overlap. And part of that is that they could appeal especially to young people, by appealing to a sense of principle. So Amash is more likely to do that, although really not in a totally Ron Paul, Bernie Sanders way. I mean, his eyes don't blaze with ideology as he's talking, and he does, vary his answers. Bernie Sanders has been saying the same damn thing for 50 years, and I'm sure Ron Paul has too, although he's less reliant on the survival reports than he used to. So he is, I think, much more ideologically focused, principled from a focus, but also has that leavened with, and actually this is useful for him to run a broader campaign right now, is he talks a lot about process, and God, no one cares about process. But he actually can make it a potentially interesting critique, especially right now. And this is one of the wild cards of the campaign. Does it have a chance? Does it not? I don't know. But like, if it does have a chance, it will be because there will be a backlash that we don't currently see coming to the so far $3 trillion that have walked out the door in Washington over the last 6-7 weeks. And the process by which that has been done, and the awful process by which people are trying to like figure out, do I access this money? How do I get this? It is an absolute crony capitalism shite show. And Amash's process critiques are totally on point about that. And they, I think, will get better hearings the more we go forward, which is to say, and he's been saying this in interviews since I began talking with him 8 years ago, you can't, the legislative branch is just basically whatever the Speaker of the House decides at the last minute on December 16th of every year in some big cromnibus package that we have 24 hours to read, and it's 70 trillion pages long. And it's just garbage, and nobody legislates, and you can't bring amendments to the floor, and there's no debate, no discussion, and they want an up or down voice vote so that no one has anything recorded. That's garbage. He's right. Absolutely right about that. Thomas Massey also right about that. Super principled about it. And we will see for the rest of this year and stretching out for years going forward, how wrong and bad that process has been screwing people over. Will that be enough to speak to people? Yeah, we'll see.
I want to go back to the convention for a second. Is there anyone either within the presidential field or within the party that would be a viable vice presidential candidate if Amash were to get the nod?
I don't know. I mean, viable within the LP, certainly. I mean, if there's a lot of wound licking among the Mises Caucus people if Amash comes in and steamrolls it, which would be admittedly a little bit odd considering how principled he's been on anti-war issues, which is, I think, their biggest animating concern. But you could throw Jacob Hornberger in there, and that would be a convincing candidate. But let's remember that Larry Sharpe is running for vice president. He was tabbed by Jim Gray, and I think surprising quite a few people maybe that he would agree to be a vice presidential candidate again, because he's been forswearing any involvement in the 2020 campaign. Larry Sharpe within the party is very popular. I mean, I think he's more popular within the party than Jacob Hornberger is, just because he's at every single convention. Like he raises money in auctions. I've been in a room with him, like I was in like Rhode Island in 2017 or some damn place. The Rhode Island LP is not exactly in an arena, that meeting, and he just will look around and sort of like, you had shoegazing libertarian types in a room together. And he's like, snap out of it. We've got to raise money. You know how money? We start in this room right now. You don't have any money? Let's see about that. And he starts like reaching for stuff. And it's like, Welch, do you have a book? All right, here. We got Matt Welch here. He's going to autograph this book. Who's going to buy it for $200? It's like ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Sold the book. I don't know if it's 200, maybe it's for 100, but like he's like he has a mind of an auctioneer, and has been building bridges throughout the party for the most part, and is popular among its various quarreling factions in ways that few people are. So I would put Larry Sharpe probably ahead of the pack of other LP presidential candidates. The possible exception might be Jacob Hornberger, but I think Sharpe is more popular within. Will be interesting to see whether there's anybody who are kind of lurking outside the current discussed frame of the Libertarian Party contest who could be brought in as a potential vice president. And I asked Amash that question on Tuesday. And he said that he's not thinking about it. He's going to respect the process, yada, yada. I would predict that he'll begin thinking about it, whether he admits to that or not.
Yeah. It's interesting you give that story about the auctioning, because we were speaking to State Senator Laura Ebke from Nebraska and when she endorsed Justin with his for president. And she gave the same story about Larry auctioning off something like the Illinois State Convention. Same sort of manner where he just kind of fires people up and is very dynamic, charismatic guy. And so that's been my impression too of him. So the last question for you. I'm a regular listener for the Reason Roundtable podcast. Really enjoy that. I really enjoy the fifth column. And I remember listening to one episode where Kmele Foster said, yes, I would absolutely be the vice presidential candidate for Justin Amash if he runs for president. Is Camille going to jump in now?
This is a heavily contested question, which is to say that I got him on the record saying yes. There's a real funny long backstory that I don't have time to tell you about why Kmele 2020 is a thing, but it involves former MTV VJ Kennedy, my dear friend, the three of which of us were co-hosted a show on Fox Business together, and a bunch of other stuff. It's very funny. Anyways, so I got Camille on the record to say yes, he would do that. And then in a non-public setting, but semi-public, we had a Zoom meetup on Thursday night among Fifth Column Patreon subscribers. Camille claimed at that moment that his wife has vetoed that as a possibility. I called him a liar and an unprincipled so-and-so. So my feeling is that if Justin Amash asked Camille directly, dude, do this, he would have to say yes, even though he's currently saying no. I think maybe he's playing hard to get. I honestly think he'd be great. You can't. I don't know if you can see this, but this is one of the funniest bumper stickers I've ever seen in my life.
For those who can't see, it says Camille 2020. Don't worry, he's not really black.
That was sent by a Fifth Column listener. I've got a hilarious video of my 5-year-old daughter reading this, and like it's super funny. But no, I mean, Camille's a very effective speaker. It takes you a while from hearing him talk to realize how crazy he is, but he cleans up well otherwise, and would certainly liven up the ticket with someone who's a very effective communicator and thinker. And I honestly think that if Justin said, Camille, look, I need you, it'd be hard not to. He's susceptible to flattery by powerful people just as much as anybody else.
And probably some nice tennis shoes.
Yeah, get him some good shoes. Well, Amashs likes himself some sneakers too. So like they got that in common. So yeah, I think he needs to be asked, but he'll probably.
Well, Matt Welch from Reason, thank you so much for joining us today in the Amashs Files.
Thank you very much for having me. Good luck with the cast.
Thanks for listening to the Amashs Files. Please subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast player and share it with your friends. We'd appreciate it if you left a written and 5-star review too. Send all questions and guest ideas to amashfiles@gmail.com.